So what role, if any, does poverty play in militant extremism? We're here to talk about that is Christine Fair of the Centre for Peace and Security Studies at Georgetown University. She, along with co-authors Graham Blair, Neil Malhotra and Jacob Shapiro, conducted the study that we just mentioned. Christine, good to have you with us. First of all, don't your findings run contrary to basically all the conventional wisdom that we now see linking poverty and militancy?
Well, it ran contrary to the conventional wisdom. USAID, the British aid organization DFID, the Canadian organization CETA, all of these aid agencies have been convinced by this common wisdom that poverty and underdevelopment breeds terrorism. It, however, does not run contrary to the very extensive and yet growing literature on terrorism in the scholarly arena. In fact, that's one of the things that has always struck me, is that the policies that have been pursued seem relatively unconnected to the robust and developing body of literature about these issues.
So what struck you most in the course of your investigation?
Well, you know, truth be told, I've been going to Pakistan since 1991. And in some sense, when I paired up with my three fabulous colleagues, Jake, Neil, and Graham, we kind of went in there with a little bit of my street sense about, what was going on in Pakistan. It had actually always been my experience that it was the elite who tended to support these groups. And, there's a couple of reasons for that. The elites are much more in tune with international affairs. They're much more familiar with what the United States are doing. And in the case of Al-Qaeda, it's only the elites that really know about it, right? So if you're a villager in the Punjab, chances are, you didn't know what Al-Qaeda was, and you probably didn't know who Osama bin Laden was until very recent years. So I wasn't terribly surprised. And then if you also think about the rise in violence that's taken place in Pakistan, there's something like 35,000 Pakistanis have been injured since 2004 alone. That's a huge number. Most of that violence takes place in relatively impoverished areas of Pakistan. So it's actually the poor in these cities that bear the cost. And so naturally, when you're predominantly the victim, you're going to be the most resistant to those groups victimizing you.
I just want to quote something to you that Britain's Home Secretary said just a few days ago. She said, if you get aid right in certain parts of the world, such as Pakistan, it will reduce the possibility of terrorism on the streets of the UK. And this, of course, comes at a time when Britain is putting forward a radical new plan for aid. How, then, does what you've found affect aid?
Well, look, you have to remember what our survey looked at. We looked at the impact of poverty, education, and so forth on the opinions about terrorism, right? Not the actual conduct of terrorism. Now, this I can tell you about Pakistan. You'll actually see a range of backgrounds among the actual terrorists conducting attacks. And, I think about this sort of as a labor market. The more sophisticated the attack is, the more sophisticated person you need. So, for example, Lashkar-E-Taiba, which is the group that conducted the Mumbai raid, those people are very well educated. In a separate study I have with other colleagues at West Point, we have a database of 810 Lashkar-E-Taiba activists, and they are some of the best educated people in Pakistan. Now, for these less sophisticated attacks that will include going into, say, a Shia mosque and throwing a grenade, maybe even a suicide bombing, you don't need terribly sophisticated people to pull that off. So if you're going to look at the actual conduct of terrorism, you may come to very different conclusions, but there's nothing that suggests their motivations are poverty. In fact, in other work that we've done, we actually find that it's the politics of these groups that seem to be more important than some degree of poverty. So, in short, going back to your question, I share the utter bafflement. I can't figure out why it is that the British government, the American government, as well as several European countries, have this idea that if you invest in the human development of these countries, that you're going to somehow mitigate terrorism. Now, there are good reasons to do human development, but you should do human development for the purpose of reaching development goals, not for the purposes of dampening terrorism.
It'll be very interesting indeed to see what the relevant governments do with this information, Christine. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing the findings with us, Christine Fair.